You start.
Welcome to the Neutral Garbage podcast show. Today we're going to be talking about fudging dice and when not to do that.
Yeah, I personally believe that fudging dice is a necessary and, in many ways, crucial part to running a story-driven campaign.
And I agree to an extent, but I don't do it as much.
Yeah.
So fudging dice, if you don't know, is rolling a die as a player or a DM or whoever.
But don't do it when you're a player,
We'll get
because
to that.
that's
No, go ahead if you're gonna. Okay, fine.
But that's when when you're fudging a dice, it's when you roll the die and you really just lie about what it says.
Mhm.
And as a player, that's just a not okay thing to do because you're lying to your DM, and that's like lying to your parents.
Which you shouldn't do.
You shouldn't lie to your parents.
Mhm.
Okay, so continue.
Can I talk now?
No. Okay, continue.
So I, as a DM, am more laissez-faire with, in terms of like, railroading and things. I prefer to, instead of a story-driven campaign, make more of a world-driven campaign, where I kind of just let the players roam free, and I don't fudge dice, or I don't try to impose anything on them, and that has pros and cons. Pros, the players feel more like free and have more like agency over their actions. Cons, all three of my campaigns that I've ran have crashed and burned.
Yeah, I think that it's like watching the end of your campaigns is like watching a train wreck. In a good way.
Yeah.
Because it's fun. That's not.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
But dumpster fires are awesome to
Yeah,
watch.
I don't think that this is a good simile?
Metaphor.
I, on the other hand, think that it's very okay and very good in many circumstances to railroad your players. I mean, don't just like tell them that they have to do stuff because that's garbage. But I think that giving them paths and kind of leading them is a good way to go because players, as everyone knows, are stupid.
They're horrible.
And they don't know what they're doing.
And if you're a DM, then you know.
Yeah, that they're just the worst. They're like they're lesser humans.
Yeah, I mean,
they don't understand.
If you've ever had to like make a puzzle for players, then you have experienced Googling puzzles for 3-year-olds.
Yeah. If you have ever made a puzzle for a 3-year-old, you have experience doing that joke didn't run through. Continue.
For all the moms out there. Or dads, to a slightly lesser extent, but you're still there. So killing players.
You gotta. I personally believe that it's okay to fudge dice in order to kill them or to not kill them.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that?
Well, you kill players a lot less than I do.
Oh, I thought. Okay, yeah.
Because you don't like killing them, and then you wanna keep a cohesive story.
Yeah, I like having that player and character relationship,
Mm-hmm.
where you start to get attached to it like a child, and you usually don't want your child to die.
Well, personal opinion.
Well, yeah, we're not gonna get political.
I personally, my style with characters is to get excited about a character, make them out completely, like flesh it out, each level, how they're gonna upgrade, put it neatly in a binder sleeve, and then never look at it ever again. Do it again the next week. I have a binder full of about 60 or 70 characters. Only about 10 I've used.
Yeah.
So I just assume that everyone else functions like that, and then whenever a character dies, they're like, "Oh, sweet! I get to make another character."
And I mean, there are people like that, but I personally know.
I've never played with them.
I think, not gonna name names, but player number 2 likes to make them. Whatever. But I like what I'm saying is I know that there are people out there who agree with you, and I know that there are people who don't. I think new players. I think actually, yeah, even with new players, I think it depends.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know of a specific young monkey child who just loves to make little characters that just are garbage, but I mean he's making them.
Cut. Is this about me?
If you say cut, then it doesn't really function. You have to like have a pause.
Welcome back, everybody. So when would you say is an unacceptable time to fudge dice?
Like a time that like it's not cool. Okay, so other than obviously with players, as a player you shouldn't do it. But even then, I feel like it's a matter of opinion and situation. Like if your character or if your players and your campaign
Mhm.
kind of function around being able to have people die and people kind of restart, then I think it's perfectly fine to have that kind of fate based system.
Like consequences?
Well, yeah. Like, if there are little consequences, I think it's okay to kill off characters with dice with
Mhm.
just straight dice rolls.
Because you work into your story.
Yeah.
My issue is that in my campaign we had the situation where everyone from the original cast was killed off individually,
Yeah.
and so by halfway through the campaign we're about like 9th, 10th level, and no one had any idea what was going
Yeah.
on.
There was a moment we were just like sitting in a swamp around our dead friend, and it was like, what are we
Like,
doing?
everyone looked up at each other like, hey,
like
wait
we have
a
this
minute.
NPC here who's like, I need help on this quest. And it's like we don't know who they are. We're just going around with them, and so we just as characters we just left. Like there
Yeah.
wasn't any point.
Yeah.
And then the campaign ended.
So I feel like killing players kind of correlates to like fudging dice in terms of just lying to. Well, no, that's not right. But just like manipulating your game to progress story, I guess, is the overarching theme we're making here. And I typically favor fun over function.
Well, yeah.
And that's not to say that your campaign style isn't fun. It's just that it's considerably more functional.
I think that there can be fun in function,
Yeah.
if you know what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, but like that's hard to do. Not everyone.
I mean, maybe for you.
Not everyone can be Matt Mercer,
I don't know who that is.
of course.
Sorry.
So
So yeah. So, well, how do you feel? When do you think is it okay to fudge dice? Like in your campaign specifically, like when do you think it's okay?
Well, I don't.
Or even just give examples.
Okay, I almost never fudge dice.
Mhm.
If I was in a situation where a character was where an encounter wasn't going as long as I'd like it to, or they're doing too well or too poorly, I would adjust a monster's stat block way sooner than I would manipulate dice.
Mhm.
For example, I would give them more health, or maybe give them an extra attack, or I would, cut their dice or cut their like attack bonus, something like that. So instead of,
I feel like that's a pretty common thing for, like maybe not in the beginning, but later DMs to do.
yeah, definitely, and just like
That kind of
just
goes
on the
into,
fly home brewing.
Yeah,
which
yeah,
I
yeah.
wouldn't say is what I'm doing. I'm just kind of metering out how long things take. But I would do that much sooner than what I would do is I would like manipulate what the dice roll means much sooner than I would manipulate the dice roll itself.
That kind of reminds me of something. This is it's a different kind of fudging, but fudging stats on the fly. Like there have been multiple circumstances where the players were fighting this thing and they're like they're blowing through it pretty quickly, and I'm like, oh, this is bad. So this happens a lot with the homebrew enemies that I make, and so I'll just kind of throw on like, oh yeah, and he can deal this much damage every few turns, and then it's like, I don't know, that's just what he does. It's like,
Yeah.
I feel like that doesn't get through as well because it feels kind of like because it feels like I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I can kind of see that like when in the player's eyes when I'm like, oh yeah, he splashes you guys with acid, and it's like, where did that acid come from? Like he hasn't done this in the last 10 turns.
Right.
Whereas
Yeah. So that's another thing is that player immersion. A common point that I've heard in terms of like fudging dice and things is that it kind of breaks player immersion in that it's like not you guys playing a game together or players versus the world, it kind of becomes more players versus the DM,
Yeah,
and
which
then that can like misdirect emotions.
yeah, it doesn't really feel right because in the end, the DM's job is to build this story around the players, and that's kind of like what draws people to D&D in the first place.
Mhm.
It's not a video game in that you're on this track of like, oh, you're this character doing this thing. It's like it can be whatever you want. It can be whatever the players want. It can be whatever the DM wants, and so everyone can be happy. But if once you start to try to take that happiness for yourself,
Penis.
it just
So what what would you say you do to help keep that immersion?
well, I this is kind of contradictory, but I fudge dice rolls.
Yeah.
Like when if it just doesn't make sense for them to be dying, like because I kind of see the characters as like these heroic like anime protagonists.
Yeah.
Like they might get hurt a lot, but they probably won't die.
Mhm.
And so I feel like that builds the immersion of I'm this hero, not just some person who ran out after a dragon and died.
Mhm.
And I feel like that makes it a story, not just a chapter in a long book.
Yeah, not just like making a character and saying, "Oh, I hope they live to level 4 because
Yeah.
then I get a cool ability."
Yeah, because in that
Which
that
is
kind of
fair.
I mean, it's a fair way of playing
Mhm.
because you can play D&D any way you want. There isn't a set. I mean, there are rules, but even I think in the beginning of the player's handbook, it's like, hey, these are just outlines.
Mhm.
Like they don't. Like, you can adjust them and do whatever you want. This is your game,
Mhm.
and I really love that. Like you can homebrew an entire game like where you basically fudge all the dice by just not rolling anything,
I
and that can
definitely-
be fun if you do it correctly.
which is extremely hard
Yeah,
and kind of unnecessary.
yeah.
Because I did that. Like every campaign I do, I homebrew less and less because I realize, man,
It's hard.
they did the work for me.
Yeah.
And if you've ever tried to homebrew a large portion of a campaign by yourself, you know that it's like mixing concrete.
There's always
Like,
like
as
little
soon as you
there's-
start, it just gets harder and
Yeah.
harder and harder.
because there's always like little holes that you find later, or especially like I found them all the time when I first started DMing, is that there's little holes everywhere that the players find, and you're like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah,
Like,
no, that's always
and
the
we
case.
kind of got away from fudging dice, but it's all in the same category of adjusting on the fly, and if that's cool.
Yeah.
And so in general, I guess my final stance on this is fudge for the story. Don't fudge for your personal like you want this to happen. Because there's a difference between the DM and the story. The DM is guiding the players along this story. And the story is the god of the realm.
Okay.
So it's fudge for the story. That's what I
Right.
say.
And I would say my final stance is do what you want. I personally don't touch it.
That sounds like a real big cop out.
Well, I hate cops, so you should know that.
Eat cops. I eat cops.
Thank you for joining us on
Fudging Dice, the podcast.
the episode.